to think about too, as we have our discussion today, we're so lucky to have Michelle on with us, who is focused on family engagement. And we had not had somebody before participating with us where that is their main focus. And I'm really, Michelle, I know you're new to the group and you may not feel as comfortable as later on speaking up, but I'm just really excited that you bring that perspective. So we'll start. My question, and this may not be the first time I've ever asked you this question, but I find there's always something new to share. Although I did have someone in a meeting the other day say, "No, I've got nothing." I was like, "Oh, okay." The question is, what's one thing most people would not guess about you? What's one thing most people do not guess about you, or they seem surprised about if they find out? And I'll start it off. Most people, my husband is retired Navy, he's retired Navy pilot, and we don't go camping. And most people think it's because I don't like to camp. They think I'm like the prissy Orange County, Southern California girl. I love camping. We don't go camping because he hates camping. So that's one thing most people wouldn't guess. All right, who wants to go next?
I'll go. Most people don't see me as a hunter, and they're actually shocked. Years ago, I was out dirt bike riding during fall upland bird, and I had my pistol strapped to my hip, because you're shooting off your dirt bike, and my helmet and all my gear on, and we had to pull off for another group of riders. We were going up and they were coming down, and I said something like, "Hello." And one of the writers said, "Professor Young, is that you?" So
That's
it
awesome.
wasn't the dirt bike that threw him off, but it was the
Yeah,
pistol. Yep. So
probably a combination.
yeah, I'm sure it was the combo.
Thanks, Annette. All right. I'll just start calling people if that's okay. You can always pass. Michelle.
All right. I think one of the things I think that often gets assumed, and like especially when we're out writing couples or whatever, is that my husband would always be the sporty one, and he's against all sports pretty much. And so I am like the sports junkie in our family. And my bachelor's degree is actually therapeutic recreation, so I work for park
Yeah.
districts and planned tournaments and stuff. So that's my interest.
Great. And Michelle, I am so sorry. I confused with you with another woodcock. I was thinking Carrie. I am so sorry. Carrie Woodcock. You guys kind of look alike and you have the same last name. But
Uh,
so sorry. I put a lot of like, I was like, you're talking about family engagement. You can talk about whatever you want, but you are still new.
we are still new, and I'm excited to be a part of the group.
Oh, good. Yeah. North Dakota newly awarded. So welcome, welcome. All right, Johnny.
Most people don't realize or even think that I would be the president of the fencing club in college, but I fenced
Ooh,
competitively and
nice.
began the sport at the college that I was attending at the time.
Wait, so you joined it in college and were competitive in college?
Yes. Yes.
Amazing.
Actually, the college I went to didn't have a fencing team, and so I started one, and then became the president of it. And then I think it's still going today.
Do you
30?
still do it?
No.
No. Okay.
No.
Well, good. That's really cool. Becky.
Yeah.
Most people don't know about me that I am still a lifeguard. I don't lifeguard per se, but I keep up my lifeguard certification. So I always go for that test every so many years just to say I can still do it.
And can you relax when you go to a beach or a pool?
I can. Yes.
That's good because my husband cannot. He's constantly like scanning and like pointing out things that are going on. So I'm glad you can still enjoy yourself. All right. And next we have Tom.
Yeah, I don't know. Probably, on the side, I'm a pretty determined guitar player still. I got into this whole business to pay bills, this daytime job stuff, and teaching. And I always thought as soon as I can, I'm going to hang it up and go full-time rock and roll. And I'm a lot closer now than back then. I think I need about 10 more years and then full-time rock and roll. So yeah, I'm a music
Really?
fanatic. There you go. That's my plan. Yeah.
I love a retirement plan. I have like a million retirement jobs I want to do. So
Yeah,
great.
yeah, totally.
Yeah. All right, Kimberly.
Um, what most people don't know about me is I grew up as a cowgirl and I'm a total
Mm.
rocker. So kind of pulled away from it as I grew up. I
Yeah.
remember I would come home during winter break and be having to go up to the mountains with the family to round up cattle in my Doc Martens.
Wow, that's cool.
But they still call me once in a while when they're branding to help with all that. But
That's great. And I have to ask you the question that I'm sure is on everyone's mind. What do you think of Yellowstone? Realistic, not realistic?
I've never even watched it.
It's too dark for me personally, but people love it. Thanks, Kimberly. Shu Chen.
It's hard to say. I think what people don't know about me was I like hiking and like to go into the woods. But so far I haven't found a better place to hike in Billings. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. That goes along with my earlier comment. I don't get to hike enough either. So when you're in town, you should hike with me.
Mhm.
All right. Oh, okay, great. So Tom still has the national meeting notes and transcribe them. So maybe Tom, you can help us with that conversation once we get there. Awesome. Yeah, and he was making the comment that like we have enough people on the in the conversation that if you're not looking at it gallery style, you have to actually like click over. And this has been, sometimes a really small meeting, but the people who have been part of it ongoing have been very dedicated to it. And I think we have the possibility of growing it from everything I've heard from the new grantees and new interests. So I'm feeling positive about it. But I also, to my earlier comments, I don't have all the answers on how to do that or what to do. Plus, I'm, working on a lot of other groups. So please do feel free to give me suggestions about how we can make this bigger and better. Because we do think, it'd be nice if all the states were part of it. I always share the non-example. I was talking to a state one time, SPDG state, and they said, well, we don't really have any Native American students. And I know for a fact they have Native American students, so this is a special ed director saying this. So, it's some, and we've done lots of little presentations to try to let people know we exist, but people's attention is in lots of different places. We get that. And so there may be different ways to publicize what we're doing and get people excited about it. All right, so let's go back to the agenda. So my intentions for this meeting, one, I'm sure there's lots to learn from the SPDG National Meeting, and I really want to take that and run with it, despite the fact that I couldn't be there. Disaggregating data, I'm hoping that you all have some ideas for each other. And I'm also hoping that I get some ideas to bring in some outside experts who might be able to help us with that. And then initial implementation stage, it's always nice to be reminded of those stage activities and make sure that everyone's thinking about doing those things. That makes life a lot easier if you know some of the things you're supposed to do, but also the questions you have could help us focus on that implementation support side. So that's my intention. So let's have the conversation about the SPDG National Meeting. And Tom, I know you're looking up your notes right now. Madly, were you able to find them? And are you on mute?
Oh, was there a question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. I was
Oh.
hoping you would kick off the conversation about the SPDG National Meeting since you had the notes.
Sure. I mean, the most important thing about the national meeting was, yeah, meeting more people involved in the SPDG work who do have at least an interest in disaggregating results for American Indian students with disabilities, if not having it as an explicit focus or disaggregation in their plan for their SPDG work. And then also, I think just running into people who have lived experience and know about communities, whether or not it's actually specific to their SPDG work plan was very good as well. So I mean, some of the faces on here today, I met you guys and I hadn't talked to you before. And if it hadn't been for that meeting, I guess we could have left it up to the universe whether or not we would have bumped into each other. But the meeting really convened us and we did gravitate towards each other. And so, you know, we had the big courtyard stuff going on with John. That's where the initial meetings happened. And I don't know, John might not have been that confident about his designs, but it really worked well. And that was, you know, like where I met Kimberly here. The connections just automatically happened. And then the next day we did have the small session in the very beautiful sunlit room on the bridge between the two main buildings, and people showed up. So overall, it was an effective event and helping us to connect with each other, and seeing faces again today shows that kind of like karate class, everyone shows up for the first one, but the real test is who shows up for the second one. So here we are. This is like karate class number 3, and we're still here. So it's good. Good connection. Those would be my introductory comments. I'm just trying to catch quick big things that were sort of highlighted at the meeting. I think family engagement, as we're talking about, was a major topic that we kind of talked about that's common to all the projects. I don't think you can work on improving outcomes for American Indian students with disabilities without a significant family engagement component, you know. So I think, and I don't think there's any final answers to things and circumstances, but definitely it was cool to talk to each other about that. And we talked about some other things as well. But family engagement really was kind of one of the bigger, more important topics. And that aspect of developing trust, you know, given historical legacy, boarding schools, and even contemporary relationships between government structures and communities, native communities. Trust is an operational problem, you know, that you have to square up with. So like even in Minnesota, we need to work on our relationships with families. We need to work on our relationships with our sovereign nations, government structures, and the educational consulting that we need to do with them. So I think we had a pretty good discussion about that as well. Most important thing I walked away with was knowing that we are available to each other and that there's follow-up interest. And so today we have an opportunity to follow through on that. So, and I wrote everyone's name down so I know who they are and I send
Good.
emails. So good. I hope is that a decent introduction?
That's awesome.
Cool.
So, yeah. So, building on that, was there anything for those of you who were able to be there? Was there anything else that caught your ear, your attention from those conversations?
I'll just add that the craziness with the Rochambeau Rockstar was a massive hit. Yes, there were a handful of people that were a little uncomfortable because it took them out of their, they're just not being rowdy is just not within themselves, but they survived clearly. Um, but I loved how it took the great big collective and it whittled us down into the concentric circles that John needed us in without, and a couple people had commented, they said, "Oh my gosh," and I think John, it was a conversation with you. They had said we should have done a end of conference, take all of the winners from the first morning and then put them together to vie for the conference overall champion, which I thought I loved how they were making that, because obviously with the Nog and with traditional indigenous, the circle, I loved how they were bringing it full circle. And then it was brought to my attention, and I'm going to share it. And I don't know, I know, Jennifer, you don't have an expendable budget, but maybe within each team that went this darling children's book that
Mm.
might that should have been the link, but maybe not. I might have to try that again. So it's the Legend of Rock, Paper, Scissors.
Yeah, yeah, we got it.
So
That's cool.
if that isn't the correct link, I'll go
Yeah.
back and pull it.
Does
Yes,
it have, you've got to tell us, like, does Rochambeau, the French general, have anything to do with it at all?
that I don't know, John.
I think what we
Sorry,
learned
I'd
was
never
that
be a
phrase
rocker,
confused a
Tom.
lot of people.
Oh, the Rochambeau Rockstar did. See, I loved it because of the alliteration, but you're right, I was probably being a little too precious there. So, rock, paper, scissors, rock star, it is. Easy enough.
Yeah, and to answer your question, I don't know if it has to do with the general. And Tom, what I said is I'll never make it in a band because I'll always be muted halfway through the show.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you for the notes to Tom. And also Tom was just sharing this. We say for a moment, talk about that curriculum for a moment, because I know about it, but just in case everyone doesn't know about it, widening the circle.
Okay, there we go. Unmute. Got it. So, yeah, so some of the things we did was take some time to talk about what's going on in each of our states. And in Minnesota, we have a curriculum designed to be part of a secondary transition called Expanding the Circle out of the University of Minnesota, which was specifically designed to be, like I said, culturally informed and culturally responsive for working with American Indian students and their families and in their communities. It's very much sort of directed at activity within the community, part of the community, to achieve, instructional goals for secondary transition. So it's available from the ICI. I've got a copy and stuff. So that's something we do. And I just had a bunch of notes from other states too and things going on. So, oh yeah, there's Michelle with the North Dakota webpage and some other things too. And I'll just add too, we did talk about cultural practices within schools themselves to build sense of belonging, trust, and engaging the community. And we talked about allowing smudging in schools and other steps that we've taken within our statewide public school systems to try and do a better job of developing that sense of belonging that research says we need to have for kids, and in the right ways, sort of in connection with the communities that we're serving. So not doing it on our own, but really referring back to community. Hey, how do we do this? Or how would you do this? Can you come do this even?
Right.
Those types of things.
Okay, great. This is great. So what I'm doing in the background is I'm on the second page of the agenda. There's a white page, and I'm taking notes, and I'm including these resources that you all are sharing. So we'll send them out after the meeting. And then you'll have this list just in case you don't want to multitask and capture it now from the chat, etc. Good. Yeah, so one thing I was wondering, Tom, when you talked about, I would say widening the circle because there's a nonprofit by that name here, so I always get it. Expanding the circle. Does Intact C, do they help to get that out to the world? The Intact C is the National Technical Assistance Center on Transition. And what's her new name?
It could be, I was actually at ICI when it was developed. So Lynn LaPointe from Pine Ridge, Dennis Olson, who was chair of one of our tribes here and is now the commissioner of Office of Higher Ed. And I think at that time we had was it NPSO at the ICI? This is back in the RRC days. I wouldn't be surprised if NTACT, picked it up too and listed it as a resource when they compiled things you can do. So, but yeah, it might be in their compilation. I wouldn't be surprised. I put the link to it though in the chat so you can check it out.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Um, yeah, I'll search it. Great. So any last thoughts about this SPDG national meeting? Okay, well, thanks. Thanks everyone. It's feel a little bit more like I was there. I appreciate that. All right. So our next item, I do have to remind myself even. So here's my notes. Next item is about disaggregating data, right? Yep, disaggregating data. So we're looking for tips, strategies, like any resources you found that have helped you with disaggregating data. Do you have any state or local data sets that have been especially helpful with finding Native American students and how their outcomes are looking, maybe the impact different things have had on them, or questions, things that you wonder, oh, I'd really love to have data that say this. How could I get there? Because we can always bring in people to help with that. So, am I sharing my screen right now? Oh, sorry, I never even got there. Here you go. That's what I'm looking at. So tips, strategies, I should add resources or questions, and who could we bring in to help? So I'll go ahead and put this in the chat so we don't have to leave this up. So I'm going to open it up to the group. And Tom.
Okay, my first contribution would be pay attention to your definition of American Indian student or American Indian student with disability. A big part of the story of Minnesota is that we use the federal definition for federal reporting, but we use self-identification for all of our work and for, you know, which students participate. So my sub point to this would be develop your definition that you're going to use for your work in consultation with your tribal communities. At least in Minnesota, and I think in other places, the tribal communities don't like the federal definition because the limitations of that definition underestimate the real number of Native students in our school system. So pay attention to definition and develop your operational definition within your state agency in consultation with your tribal communities. That way your tribal consultation will go a lot smoother too, and you'll be able to be on the same page as it comes to what the data begins to tell you. There you go.
Excellent point. Questions and follow-up for Tom about how they got there.
Tom, with that collective definition for Minnesota, are you able to get a better picture of the number of Indigenous youth? Because we know with historical trauma that sometimes they won't self-identify, etc. And it's recognized by the federal government that some of the blanks they have to fill in don't give them the appropriate, you can only choose one. Like, it drives me crazy when I can only tell you I'm Hispanic, but I can't tell you, the other part of me.
It makes the numbers, it makes a significant difference. It really does. And that's understandable because, you know, we had urban relocation programs in Minnesota, I imagine in other states as well. And people understandably became, you know, fell in love, became parts of their communities, etc. And then if the federal definition insists on a blood quantum and a tribal enrollment condition, it really it takes away that identity, even though you're not far from that identity. That's still the person you are, and it's part of your story and your family. So quantitatively, yes, makes a difference. You'll see a big difference in the numbers, at least in Minnesota, where we had so many relocation programs happening. And then in terms of good practice too, it's even in like Native literature. If you read some authors, the experiences, or talk to somebody, you know, if you get a chance, and the the sort of, it's a bad experience, you know, this sort of systematic taking away from your identity, and it does cause suffering, and identity confusion. So we can reverse the course of, many years of supporting that and instead do things that put people together with their identity and see them in that identity too. So that's another, I guess it's an ethical dimension along with a quantitative. So, but yep, there you go. That's my short answer.
Yeah. Good. Thanks, Becky. Will you tell us about what you just dropped in the chat?
Yeah, so Tom and I are doing a data dig, and one of the questions was, how are we peeling back the layers and getting really, taking a laser focus view?
Yeah.
And this is just part of it, as a sample. And one thing in doing the data piece is really taking notes on where you're pulling the data from. So each year when you're going back to do similar comparisons, you're pulling from that same group. So just a simple trick that I had learned was, you'll see I highlighted the blue boxes, and then down below I have lots of notes. And so I called it data notes. And I found that particularly helpful because when I'm working with our data team and asking them to help me pull information, then, like Tom was talking about, our definition that we're using, specifying there which definition that we are using. We have the federal race ethnicity definition, and then we also have the state race ethnicity definition. Talking about, for us in Minnesota, we have all schools were included, and we have classifications. So like 70 through 79 are our ALC schools, students there. We also include those, but 70 through 79 are characteristics of schools. And then if a school has a small number, and the NA for us, because sometimes people put NA in and everyone has a different understanding of that. But for when we put it in here, it indicated no eligible graduates. And then the highlighted cells, that was the year prior to the first full year of implementation, because we wanted to see, prior to them starting, did we see increases happening? And so then we just took, this is cohort 1, that top group, and then cohort 2, and then we have statewide, but really breaking it down individually as a starting point for the schools, and then providing that to the schools, and they can break it down further when we have our monthly meetings with them.
That's great. So how have they reacted? Like the schools, when you're sharing it with them, are they surprised? Are they happy to finally see things represented as they're really experiencing them?
I would say, so we get both. The schools that regularly review their data, like Cloquet, you'll see here 100%, they're regularly reviewing it monthly. They're bringing data to their team meeting prior to them meeting with us at MDE. And so they're really conscientious. They know which students they need to be focusing on. Schools that don't keep that pulse on it on a regular basis, it's a surprise. So that is really those focuses of bringing the data to the team and having those data informed decisions.
Yeah.
Because we're getting down to the individual students after we give it to some of the schools, the smaller ones, Bagley, Coquet, Nashing are smaller schools, where they truly know each of those students individually, and putting that, student name and knowing who that student is and finding out what we can do.
Right. And you had such a different experience for Minnesota, where you were working with Minneapolis, St. Paul, Duluth, and Osseo. I don't remember. I think Osseo is mid-sized, right?
Yeah, what would you say, Tom, for Osseo? Are they like 6th or so?
Yeah,
Largest?
there's suburban ring. I mean, yeah,
Mhm.
they're not as big as the big districts, but yeah, definitely part of it.
And then going for very small schools, like among other changes, right, in the kinds of districts and schools you're working in. But how has that felt in terms of getting your hands around these numbers?
I think it helps people. So each of the schools has an annual plan, and each of them sets goals. And so it provides a factual goal when they're developing their SMART goal to start from.
Got it. Good. That's really helpful.
But I just share that as those data notes have been so helpful, particularly when other people you're sharing the information with and they only may get a glimpse of it, to make sure that there's that narrative piece with it as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. And by the way, our data folks in OSEP, who I think do a really good job, and Tom, not all of you had a chance to see it, and hopefully we have the recording available. John, if you want to try to find that, if it's not too hard. Tom gave a great presentation about disaggregating data and how critical it is for Native Americans, and has also talked about at various times, like, once you do have your arms around the data, it's like turning a canoe in the water as opposed to turning a battleship, right? Like, of this, like, you're trying to do this huge thing, or you're like really focused and you know what you're trying to do, and it's just a lot easier. But I would recommend, if we can find that recording.
I'll look
And
for it now.
thanks. And you didn't get a chance to listen to it. I think it's really important and really good. Yeah. Firekeeper's daughter got it. So I'm interested in hearing from other states about how you are looking at the data. And Michelle, you all are newly here with SIG Network and with the SPDG, but obviously you did a lot of work to put your application together. Any lessons learned from that period of putting together data for the application?
I don't, I feel lucky because we have really great data, I feel like, in our state, and they give us a system where we can sort pretty much all of our federal reporting by subgroups and by things. Although hearing from Minnesota, I mean, ours is really on that federal definition. I would say I think the one thing we encounter maybe as a challenge in this, um, and I'd imagine other states are as well. We have some of our districts where we have some of our tribal land where students are reported on the BIE side versus on ours. And sometimes they're split by schools, like the middle school is BIE and the high school is state. Um, and yet we have a few tribes where they blend it. So you have students at every grade level mixed, some report BIE and some don't. But we have some that are students very transient. So like for our state systemic improvement plan, we look at a cohort across 6 years, but some of our students jump between BIE and back. So for these students, it's sometimes hard to see that pattern or see a consistent, have data points enough to make those better data informed decisions. So I think that's where our struggle right now is how to better be able to see those patterns for the students.
Yeah. And does anyone from the group have any wisdom on that, about students who are moving to different places and tracking them?
I'd have to send the link out later because I don't have it directly. But myself and two colleagues at the agency, um, we created a document. Yeah, I guess geared to any teacher, because any teacher can be prone to disparage behind the scenes, or with a shrug of the shoulder or rolling of the eyes in front of a child. But we call it transitional resilience, and I may have shared it with this group before, Jennifer and John, but I'll dig out the link. And what we really zeroed in on, because we know that graduation rates, your districts are penalized if the child doesn't complete with the cohort they started with at the freshman, and we can't change the federal definition of graduation. And so what we were looking at was to remind educators that just because a student might be transitional and transfer from living situation to living situation, that it's more often than not a good thing. It's because there are a lot of caregivers in this child's life that love them and support and nurture them. And so we have a if then scenario. So do you know if the child has an IEP in their former setting? If the answer is yes, then within our OPI, our Montana Office of Public Instruction system, then it takes them, this is how you get that IEP document and you get things, and what do you do while you're waiting for that paperwork? We still recommend that you give the child a tour, even if this is the 9th time they've circled back to your district. You still respect and greet and give a tour and have a plan for that child to feel welcome, for that family to feel welcome. And, so starting with, you can't have a frontline, administrative assistant who's grouchy or mean, which we know that happens in districts. So it just really walks through all of the things, and it reminds these educators, that these students are valuable, and we bring them in, and we don't judge. When we're doing professional development, we might use the example. So you've got a young 12, 13-year-old girl, and she appears to be ping-ponging, from one community to the next. Well, it's because her grandmother is the elder who teaches her the beauty of becoming a woman. And so she's ping-ponging between her regular home setting, to go through traditional ceremony with her grandmother, as she's coming into womanhood. And so why would you shame her for not being in school, and, oh, you're back? And I mean, we use real examples that we've heard educators say. It also, we targeted youth justice system. We have a particular district on one of our reservations. There is a youth incarcerated facility on the border, and a lot of staff, oh, what are you doing back here, Annette? Aren't you supposed to be in jail? I mean, literally, when Annette comes back in the school. And so it's abhorrent that adults do behave that way, but we hope that by looking at it from a different lens, that these kids are just loved. And why would we shame a child for being so deeply loved and cared for? So I'll find that.
Yeah, that'd be awesome in that.
Well, and I think that fits perfectly. I mean, we had one of our bigger, so we really, within 5 school districts in our state is 50% of our students, as the rest are very spread out in the rural. And one of our bigger districts, who has one of our lower graduation rates, when they did that deep dive into that data, they found that students who had been with them from 6th grade through high school graduated. It was those who had 1 or 2 moves within those years that were the ones less likely to graduate. So kind of exactly what Annette was saying. If they moved and came in and had one bad experience, it seemed to be that predictor of if they'd make it or not.
That's really helpful to hear, Michelle. Good. Okay, this is such an interesting conversation, and I love it that it's not exactly the direction I thought it would go. I don't know if I thought about a direction, but it wasn't this. So this is wonderful. Kimberly, Johnny, and Shu Chen, anything else about disaggregating data? Anything that you are aware of that your state is doing, or that is Shu Chen, you're evaluating, is that correct?
Yes, I'm evaluated, but I'm new to the whole SPDG program, I mean the grant. So I'm kind of starting learning
Yes.
The aspect, and I'm curious about how to handle Native American students' data as well, because it's just so few. And what I understand is it's so few. When you make it more specific, disaggregate, that will come into some sort of confidentiality issue. Say among the group, I'm the only minority, and when you put that minority category or that specific Native American tribal's name, and all of a sudden you probably can figure out who that student is. I mean, that's just one thing I'm kind of I mean, in terms of confidentiality issues. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought up that question. And so how are other states, that's going to be true generally, right? With the exception of the fact that now Becky and Tom are working with schools where they're, largely Native American students, but generally what you're saying is going to be true. So how are others dealing with that? The small N size question.
Can I kick it off and say that
Please.
small N size is important for statistical analysis and for, I think, like we're talking about suppression of data cells for purposes of maintaining confidentiality. But in these projects, we might be doing one or the other of those, but so often in terms of evaluating educational programs at a district and especially the state level, we are still going to be able and want to use those numbers because for two reasons. One is they give us a realistic grasp of the situation quantitatively. And number two, when we're in a space where the historical pattern is making Native students disappear, we don't want to do that in our state agency evaluation practices and continue making them disappear. So Jennifer alluded to my aircraft carrier versus canoe analogy before too, and I love small ends because in terms of implementation and scaling up and everything, the small ends are great because it can give you such a grasp on what needs to get fixed or happen when you can get down to a very limited list of people with actual names within a school building. Like think about PBIS and Swiss and stuff. And there's hardly an excuse for not going directly to the student, to the situation and saying, what supports are we delivering for this specific student? So just a couple of considerations there at the state to finish up the state level. I compare the small numbers as well. When you have big ambitious projects like K3 literacy, you're trying to turn an aircraft carrier. It's huge scale, and you still have to start with a small number of students to get there. But the nice thing with the small end, I think offers tremendous promise is how often do you run into a situation where the scale is very rapidly manageable quickly because it's not big? That's the canoe, in a school building, you know exactly who those kids are, and you can step in to provide them more support. At the state level, it's not a giant project necessarily. It's a manageable number of kids for scaling up a specific practice. So those are kind of things I hammer in that PowerPoint. I think that I threw in the chat for you all, and love talking about it. Thanks for the opportunity.
And Tom, when it comes to your SIP and your APR, any considerations there for Suchin?
Again, I think we don't have to use cell suppression because we don't report any district level data. So I'm trying to think of anything where that really enters into it. And the level of quantitative data analysis we do, the state population offers a sufficient end for any inferential kind of statistic you want to run as well too. So, I mean, generally it's okay. It's when you get in the business of reporting school district or school building level results, sure, you're going to use cell suppression, but don't let that stop the work. That's because of the personally identifiable information involved in the restrictions under FERPA and other things too, where that's going to kick in. But within the house, doing the work, we don't let the small cell size get in the way. We use it as a leverage point for the work because the scale is manageable.
And I think Suchin, as you're coming to times like that, I recall this from the significant disproportionality days, which were years and years ago for me when I was actually working on that, both at a state level and then at the federal level. You cannot name the school or the district, right? You can give it a different name when you're doing that. So you could bring data information to us and just change the name of the school or district, and we could work with you on that as well. Because I think there are various ways. I understand Tom saying, if you're aggregating the whole state, it's okay. But there may be sometimes that you want to work on some data that you know, or show some data still. And I think maybe changing names could work. Yeah. And I think the 10 or fewer students is from from a long time ago, that was my memory that what most states did. Yeah, it looks like I'm getting agreement there. Good. But good question, Shuchen. And I wondered about that too. Johnny, anything from Alaska? Any questions or ideas about disaggregating data?
No, I'm really enjoying this conversation though. I wish David Tarsi, our evaluator, was here. He could
Oh,
add so
yeah.
much more to the table that I,
Yeah.
in my vast non-experience, could add. But yeah, no, I think all of these comments are really good to hear. And I think,
Mhm.
you know, we are the biggest little state in the nation, and we're so spread
Mhm.
out, and we have a very large population of Alaska Native. So it, you know, it's most of what we report is Alaska Native to some degree.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's still things to consider.
Yeah. And I don't think we're not saying minority majority anymore, are we? Wasn't there a new term for that? But I heard it somewhere recently. But one other question I have for you all, and I do understand I'm still supposed to talk about initial implementation, so probably gonna do that the fast way in just a second. But was there a different feel under the current and outgoing administration when it came to Native American students? Did you feel more a push in that direction or more support to do the work?
I can't answer that, Jennifer, in terms of the administration. I probably could, but I can't phrase it
Mm.
nicely. But I can answer that in terms of Valerie.
Hmm.
I believe, and this is just my humble opinion, that
Yeah.
she is such a welcome breath of fresh air. And I love how in her monthly notes, you know, in the newsletter, that she doesn't shy away from truth.
Yeah.
She's very gracious, but she puts the truth right out there.
Yeah.
I feel that Valerie is the first person in that position to not ignore or sugarcoat or give a Pollyanna view of marginalized youth across the US.
Yeah. That's great. And she's been just on my side, I think she has been a joy to work with. She's like that in the office as well. We don't get the problem with that position is that their job is really to be out in public, right? Their job is not so much to be with us. And so I don't get to see enough of her. But yeah, she's been consistently caring about those things and showing her care ever since she got in. And her son is a delight if you ever get a chance to meet him. He's in middle school now. He has Down syndrome. Matthew, he's just this fantastic kid. I wish he would come to the office more. Great. Thank you so much for finding that too, John. All right. So as I promised, we're going to talk about initial implementation the fast way. I do want to say thank you for all the folks who were willing to share. And there's really no, like, again, like, I don't know things. I had to tell you all that I don't really have much to add to the disaggregation conversation. There are gonna be things we know, things we don't know. That's why we bring pool our knowledge, which is very Native American, right? And we did have a speaker years ago. It just came to my mind, and I wanted to make sure I mentioned to you, Stephanie Autumn. Some of you were there for that, some of you were not. Do we, and I'm sorry to do this to you again, John, but do we still have that recording from Stephanie Autumn?
Do you know when it was by any chance? So I'm having to dig through archives because of the
Yeah.
new website.
Yeah.
I'm happy to do it.
Yeah, that was the SPDG
But
National Meeting, and I want to say it was 4 meetings ago.
okay.
It was definitely virtual. This we know.
And Stephanie Autumn, I'll see
Stephanie
what I
Autumn.
can do.
Yeah. Okay. So stages of implementation. I've been pulling so much stuff as we talked. Here it is. This is stages of implementation. I'm going to give you the link so you can play around with it yourself. It was actually, this time it was very hard for me to find it on the Active Implementation Hub, which I'll have to make a note to share with the team there. So CSEP is a TA center that works with states who are ready and willing to work with them. And I'm sharing my screen still, right? Am I sharing my screen?
No.
Oh, shoot. How do I keep on doing that? I think I didn't do the funnel step. Okay. Am I sharing it now?
Yep.
Okay, great. So, and they work on states, the kinds of things that need to be done in order for the teacher on the ground to use evidence-based practices successfully. So everything else that needs to happen in the state system to get there. So that's, making sure that you have good trainers and good coaches, that you have a great data system, that administrators know how to support folks, and thinking through the state system of what needs to happen to end up there. And so initial implementation, if you go through the stages, there's the exploration stage where you're deciding what, if you're just talking about an evidence-based practice, say you're looking for a literacy practice or program. So that's when you're exploring the different practices, what's going to have a good fit. Do we have enough resources to do this thing? And in the case of Native American students, do we have any data whatsoever that show that this would be a good program for Native American students, right? And then you go through installation stage. You've chosen something and you're getting everything ready to make sure that once it starts being used, you're going to have some real success. The initial implementation stage is that next stage where you're really starting. It's getting off the ground. So you need an implementation team that regularly uses data. You need the practitioners beginning to use the program or practice. You need to use the coaching supports. And you can see there's a link here. So you're going to get to more information if you follow that. You continue the training and professional learning as needed. Gather data and feedback from multiple sources. You see families are included there, stakeholders, practitioners themselves. Improvement strategies based on the analysis of data. This is something really important for the implementation teams to do. Refine the implementation infrastructure. That infrastructure I was talking about, the training, the coaching, the data system, leadership supports, resources. What's working, what's not working, what do you need more of? We have this data connection from how the training went. Like, did people get all the content they needed? Did they understand the content they needed? Did they get the skills they needed? That information goes to the coaches. The coaches say, well, they didn't really get this skill. So could you please work with them on how to take data on kids' oral reading fluency, say? And then, is the data system working? Can the implementation team at the school and or the teachers, can they look at some nice tables and charts that tell them what they're doing well and what they need to focus in on? Leadership supports, making sure that leaders know, like maybe they have a checklist, they can go in, they can see how things are going, be a real instructional leader about this. And then the resources, maybe they need subs some days so that they can go to the training. Maybe the special education teacher has never been given the actual program. Happens a lot. So thinking about those things. Using feedback loops with leadership practitioners, staff, recipients. So this expectation that we're going to get the data or we're going to have these conversations this often, and we need someone who's ready to be a decision maker when we say, hey, we need another resource, or hey, this isn't working, or hey, this data system. Who do we talk to about that, and how quickly are we going to get that decision? So that's that decision-making criteria. Oh, sorry. And then this is decision-making criteria for expanding the practice or program. So in a perfect world, we don't experiment on our kids on a wide scale. We maybe experiment in one classroom and then we learn and see, is it working for all the students in that classroom or most of the students in that classroom? And now we're going to scale it up. Or have we learned from somewhere else in the state that's doing this work and now we're going to scale it up? I don't hear that talked about a lot lately. I know Minnesota was great about doing that. And then here are the outcomes. So in the end, whoever you're focused on, you want the majority of practitioners using the program or practice, right? You don't just want it happening in one class, not the other, unless that's your actual, what's the word I'm looking for, unless you're trying to study it that way. And then data are used regularly to inform decision-making. Practitioners are beginning to achieve fidelity, right? You're working toward fidelity in initial implementation. And you have fidelity decision point of like, what is fidelity? Quality of implementation improving across practitioners. You note variability is to be expected, and evidence for feasibility of implementation. So staff are becoming more confident. meaningful engagement with recipients and families on the practice. And they say initial implementation is like the first pancake off the griddle. If it's not perfect, it's because the griddle needs to be changed, the temperature, etc. But think about all that infrastructure that goes around a practice. That is it. Luckily, you have the document, so you can play around with it. Thank you so much for a great conversation. I am going to send out via John all these notes and resources. Thank you for all participating today. As with all things Native American, we really all have to put something in, even if it's not the answer, but just a question. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, John, I gotta go.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Yep.